Since the late 90s, Shawn Tuma has been working with legal departments and security teams at the intersection of law and technology. This has given him a unique perspective for how these important defenders work well together and do not work well together, and what a difference that can make with how their organizations manage cyber risk. This led him to write a book called the GC CISO Connection to help start a dialogue and strengthen the partnership between these critically important roles. The next step is to bring together people who understand these roles to share their experiences and continue the dialogue. Because none of us have all the answers, it is through conversations like these that we can all improve how we work together to improve cyber resilience. This is the GC CISO Connection Show.
Hello and welcome to the GC CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. And joining me today is my friend and CISO extraordinaire, Ian Schneller. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Shawn.
Well,
been looking forward to this.
You know, I have too. I mean, we started talking about recording this about a year ago, and it's taken us this long to get each other, schedules to align. But I've been really excited about the conversation, just based on conversations you and I've had in other areas, over time.
Likewise.
Yeah. So hey, I want to go ahead and jump in. We try to keep it pretty quick here. So I want to talk a little bit about your background, because your background and experience really plays a big role in how you handle, and have handled the role of being a CISO. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Thanks. Well, it's hard to believe, but been in the field in one way or another for 34 years now. Wow. And it started in the U.S. military, where I started in the early mid-90s. And I bounced around, did several different things, but along the way wound up in the information security arena. But it was primarily the offensive arena, and used that skill set for over a decade to eventually become a cyber defender. And understanding attacker mindset and techniques, I think, made me a better defender. And so after about 24 years in the military, I retired over a decade ago, which is hard to believe. It goes quick. Worked in Wall Street for a while, working with the U.S. government on how do we defend our critical infrastructure from a catastrophic attack. And that was absolutely a thrilling time. Deep policy, very strategic thinking, and eventually moved in to be CISO of a financial services firm. And I just retired about 5 months ago after being CISO of a very large healthcare firm, and absolutely loved it. So when you really wrap that up, it's a combination of offensive cyber, defensive cyber. But I think the really important part is through all of that, anything from small to very large team leadership. Yeah. That was developed over years. And when you put it together, I think that's my background. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's an amazing background. And you also flew planes.
A long time ago, yes.
Yeah. So what did you fly?
Well, I started out in Cessnas and moved up to high performance, and then flew aerobatics for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And then in the Air Force, I was parked at a fighter training squadron and got to fly a lot of fighters and in the backseat. But it was still logged time and learned a lot. And it's interesting that also defines part of how I work as a CISO. When you look at flying a plane, a lot of it is risk management. The mechanics of takeoff, go to your going, and land is not as hard as you'd think. Most of what you're doing is, well, what happens if something goes wrong? What could go wrong? And you have a lot of instruments that are basically risk indicators to tell you maybe something's not going the way you'd expect. And then you think about, what do I do now? How do I mitigate that risk? And that is almost how you work as a CISO.
God, I love that. I mean, that is a great example of taking practical experience from the past and applying it to how you do your role now. And, it strikes me as interesting that you've been in a CISO in financial services and healthcare. Those are two of the most highly regulated industries we have here in the U.S. I mean, that's a pretty intense level right there.
And I have to say, there's also a third CISO gig. When I was in uniform, I was the CIO and CISO equivalent of the nation's largest West Coast port of entry. And so in addition to defensive sector, I also had most of the air traffic control systems for the northwest part of the United States. So the FAA came in as well. And so got very used to working in the regulated environment very quickly.
Yeah, and used to working under pressure.
Yes, very much so.
Ian, part of the theme here is the GC CISO connection, and that came out of the book that I wrote about a year and a half ago now, not quite a year and a half ago. But I don't know if you know this, but you had a role in this book.
I didn't know that.
You absolutely had a role in this book because one morning you and I were having a conversation at CISO ExecNet, and you had just gotten off the phone with your legal counsel. And we were walking back into the meeting and we started talking about that, the relationship. And you said, I have a really great relationship with my legal counsel. We talk a lot. And that stuck with me. And then later after the meeting, I was talking to another CISO. And he said, I really wish I could just get my GC to respond to me, to acknowledge me, to have a relation, and they won't. They won't work with me. And so that happened all at that meeting. And then within about a month from that, Dina Stroh and I were on a planning committee for a conference. And she was the first guest on the show. And Dina said, Shawn, why don't you and I do a talk about how legal and technology should be working together? And it's like all of this came together right there. Your conversation, Dina's conversation, all that. And that's really what led to the book and led to the show.
Wow, I had no idea.
I'm you were absolutely part of that inspiration for that.
Well, it's a fantastic book. It is a fantastic book, very true and very relevant. I do really recommend anybody read it.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's I've enjoyed our conversations about not only that topic, but anything cyber since we met. And what I love is you're a thinker. Like you are a reader, you're a thinker, and anybody that follows you on LinkedIn knows that, right? And we don't have enough of that in today's world, So that's a big part of what I wanted to come in here and talk about today is your thoughts and your ideas, really that stem from a conference you spoke at last January that I attended. And you were talking, really, I think your topic was from security leader to enterprise executive, navigating the C-suite as a CISO. So I want to talk about those points because I took a lot of notes in there because they were really, really important
I
points.
got nervous a little bit because I saw every time I talked, Shawn was in the corner writing down vigorously. And I wasn't sure if it was good or if it was going to be a counsel afterwards.
The critique is coming. No, but I want to talk about that. But I want to talk about it in the context of AI strategy and governance, because that's where the world is headed. So generally speaking, I'm talking too much now. You need to talk more.
I'm enthralled. Every time you talk, I'm always all ears. And sometimes I'll take notes too.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you.
But it's a good question. And when we look at information security, I'm not going to say we've cracked the code in how to do information security industry-wide, completely effective and integrating into the C-suite, but we are cracking the code and we're moving in the right direction. And what I see is artificial intelligence now brings unique risks, but the framework or the structure to govern those risks, there's a lot of parallels. And so when I'm thinking about the role of the CISO and the role of AI governance, I think there's a lot of parallels that can be made. Let's start with very basic. Is it governed? Does AI risk go to the board? Is there an accountable official for your AI risk? Is there a segregation of duties? Is the person running the governance different than the technologist implementing AI? These are some basic questions, but usually can form a foundation of, do you have the right governance? And the reason I say this, it's fairly entertaining because it's not you, but there are some really good newsworthy stories that come out on governance gone wrong with AI already. And so it is very, very important to do that. To me, when you govern something, artificial intelligence or information security, you got a challenge. There's always risk involved. You're never going to get rid of all the risk. So how do you get the risk to a tolerance the business can work within?
Yeah.
And that can be tricky, especially if you're risk adverse. And so you must have the right framework to be able to realize the benefits of the capability, mitigate the risk. And if you sway too far in either direction, you may not implement artificial intelligence or InfoSec on one side if it's too risky, but you may not get the opportunity if you don't either. And so getting that right balance is very key, and governance is usually the right answer to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point. And, you know, for those of us in security or now AI or data governance or whatever else it is, we do this because we love it. You know, that's like we're passionate about it. So we want to geek out on all the latest things and all the latest trends. And we forget that our audience oftentimes could care less about these things we're geeking out on. They want to know what's the point, right? And that was something you said in the talk you did last year or earlier this year, is you got to be a business leader, right? To go from being a security executive to a business leader. And that's what so many people lose sight of. And a lot of CISOs, a lot of the CISOs I work with, they tend to lose sight of the fact that we're all here for a purpose, and it's not security, you know?
Right. The way I look at it is, let's start with aim point, visionary aim point, which traditionally is defend the organization from a cyber attack, you know, and thusly customers and reputation, all the very important things. But defend is not the only thing. If you stop at defend, you can make it so hard to operate the business, even just status quo, let alone grow, that the company objectives fail. And so I've always said you have to defend, but also enable secure growth responsibly. Responsibly is the key. You don't just grow without security, but how do you design the capabilities so that the innovations a company is doing comes out securely at the end, so it moves at the speed of business? And to do that as a CISO or an AI risk executive, what are the company's overall objectives? Understand those so that then you can set priorities for where the secure growth happens. Because it is not easy, as you mentioned, it is not easy. It takes time, and it's very rare that you can do it all. So where do you take the risk? Where do you shuffle resources? Because at the end of the day, a CISO, you're going to be judged at, did you defend, but also did the company meet its objectives without security slowing it down? But is it also secure when it's deployed?
Yeah.
And so it's a tough needle to thread, and you have to know both. But what you'll find is once you get that done, and I'm not saying, I don't think anybody ever gets it done perfect. I mean, if it was done perfect
we're
every
not
time,
aspiring
it would be
for
easy.
perfection.
And it's not an easy job. But once you start doing that, then you start understanding the business better. And then the next phase you'll find as CISO, you're there at the executive table and you're not talking technology or security at all. You're talking about what should our next objectives be. And you start to become a trusted person to help shape objectives for the organization. Organizational objectives, not security objectives. And you'll start to see yourself grow as a top floor leader at that point too.
You know, that's very similar to the challenges that I go through and that we attorneys go through as outside counsel. Is we know the law, we know the legal principles, we know the best practices, we know the implementation recommendations for a lot of this. But if we don't know the business, if we don't know our clients' objectives, then all of that's like academic discussion. It's how do you apply those things to the business to meet the business objectives? That's the challenge. It's the same thing for the CISOs.
Well said, exactly. And it's tough because you may come in as a technologist. When I did my first CISO role for defense, for me it was pretty easy. Well, I don't want to say easy. It was easier because I understood defense and I understood aviation very well compared to most CISOs. But when I started healthcare, I was up front in my interview, and especially when the offer came, this is my first job in healthcare. I will be a little ineffective in understanding the healthcare objectives for a while. But then I made it my job. I learned. I took a Harvard class on healthcare policy. I talked to execs. I learned and stayed up late and read, thought. As a CISO, you have to develop yourself in that industry, and it's on you. You may get a little bit from the company, but it's really on you.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And this is something that I commend you on. And I've said it before, you are a student of your craft. In that, I mean, I see all the stuff you read, and You don't just read and just hit share. Like you read and provide insight of, hey, this is why others should read this. And I think today, in a world where all of us are getting replaced by tools, it really comes down to our wisdom and our judgment and our experience, that it's where we've got to provide value.
I agree. And more than that, it's taking wisdom from multiple disciplines and applying to our craft. And so I think it's very important not to just read technology or security or artificial intelligence, read some biographies. Read some philosophy. This is really weird coming from someone who has a couple of engineering degrees, right? And then if you look at my stack of books at home, and there is a stack, and I get yelled at sometimes for having too big of a stack. If you open them up, it's filled with chicken scratch and underline and writing, and I think through it, and then I let them sit for a while, then I go back and read the chicken scratch again. I probably put too much time into it. But, reading something, thinking about it is really key in any craft you have.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes me think about, you were telling me about a podcast you were listening to on the way here today about Nike and getting back to focusing on what your objectives really are. Then I think, that's something we all have to remember,
Very, very true. Life is full of opportunities, distractions, fun things. And if you're not careful, and I'm 100% guilty as anybody, I can get distracted. Go over here.
Yeah.
You got to keep reminding yourself, all right, our objective is here. Let's make sure we're at the basics. If we get the basics right, then we can expand.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, I struggle with that every day,
It's fun. It's interesting.
Well, like we get all these news feeds, right, of things, of recent happenings and this and that. And just separating what is relevant and what I need to be focused on from all the noise is a big challenge.
And if you have the overall objective and the vision in mind, that'll help you separate the noise from what truly matters with all these different inputs coming in. And I'm not saying I get it perfect, because I love reading it as much as anybody else, but sometimes you do have to reground yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and realize, am I reading for fun or am I reading for knowledge, right?
Right.
That, Ian, another point that you had talked about in your talk was the communications and mastering communications. And, you were specifically talking about communicating to the board. And one of the struggles that I know a lot of folks have when going to the board, or even the senior executives, is, how do I make the case that we need more resources without saying we really suck? Like without saying, hey, we're in a bad position, we've got to have more resources. How do you make that argument while demonstrating we're doing a good job, but we need more?
It's a great question, and one I see coming up a lot in classes and LinkedIn posts and different seminars. And the first thing I'll say is every board is different. They have different experience, different knowledge, different longevity, and different interests. And so the first thing, really understand, how much does your board already know? What's their culture? Do they like a lot of metrics? Do they want large topics? How do they want to be talked to? How do they consume information? And that can be really tricky. Ask for advice there. And what I found really works, if it's true, right? I mean, some companies you might come in and it's a complete dumpster fire.
Yeah.
So this won't work. But what I found starting out good is I'll come out and I'll say, we're starting from a position of strength. And here's why. Because you want to have the board comfortable to the degree that they've got the right person running the program, that you understand what's happening. So a position of strength might be that you have a strong compliance background and you've passed regulatory exams or have the certifications. That's a good baseline. That's not your endpoint. Yeah. And then talk about your risk management and how you've defended the company, which isn't just defense, but if something goes wrong, do you have the right capabilities in place to have continuity to keep key functions running while you also respond and recover back to normal? Oftentimes I see those two pieces missing. But then what you can say is, look, the adversary is very motivated, and they are. Look at how much money cybercrime brings in, or the value of the information to, say, a nation state. They're very, very motivated. they're very capable. We're seeing this going back to your artificial intelligence question. It's only making them more capable. And so that means they're constantly evolving, and therefore we must evolve faster than they do, which is tricky.
Yeah.
And then what I'll pivot into is, as that threat's evolving, they're evolving in these areas. For us to get in front of it, our roadmap includes X, Y, and Z. And that's how I personally frame it.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that substantive process. One of the things you also talked about was the structure of how you make that communication. Many times those individuals who may be experts at something, who they have a comfort with that, right? CISOs many times, or lawyers, we have a comfort with the law or comfort with security. We find when we're uncomfortable, we resort to what is our baseline, which is delving down into all the nuances, all the minutia. How does that work with a board?
You're very true. The first universal truth is we tend to gravitate towards what we know best. And what we know best, others may not. And two things usually happens when you do that. You either scare the audience or they have no idea what you said and they stop listening. Neither one is a desirable outcome. And I struggle with this too. It was a learning experience throughout my entire career. And you see good cases, you experience them, you reflect. And the challenge is to always take what you know, boil it up, and then boil it up, and then boil it up again. And then with your audience, you read the room, you start out high, and then you can go to the next level. And you can tell about the right level by reading the audience right. If you're in the room, virtual makes it a little bit tougher. Yeah. But there are techniques you can do on the virtual side to say, hey, I've provided the strategic context. I'm happy to dive into this any deeper if you would like. And that's a technique that usually works pretty well. And that will tell you if the audience wants to know more. But yes, you always have to check yourself.
Yeah, and with that big picture. Like, this is because boards are focused on strategic roles. Their role is not tactical. And so if we come in with too much detail, I don't really care about the nuances of how you're doing this. What's our risk? How's this going to impact the bottom line? Way of thinking. Very true. So I really enjoyed that. I want to go now to what you were in that talk. You manage risk management done right. And this goes to what you were saying about flying the plane and your background and your experience. In that talk, you made the point there, that you shift the focus from perfection to effectiveness. What do you mean by effectiveness? I love that term.
I look at programs from the lens of effectiveness and risk. And you can spend a lot of time to reduce risk, but you're not effective in it. You're spending a lot of money to become risk tolerant, but then effectiveness might mean you're spending less money and ideally still maintaining that same level of risk tolerance. And so when I see risk indicators, often I see them munged or swapped or misunderstood. So when I look at a control or a capability, in my mind, I want to see a risk indicator. I want to see a performance indicator. A very simple example might be if I'm driving down the highway in my car, a effectiveness indicator might be my speed limit or my speed. And obviously, the faster I go, the quicker I'm going to get to my objective. Theoretically, right? Let's limit traffic and all that. However, I've got a temperature indicator. And if I go too hard, too fast, that temperature indicator might slide up. That's a risk indicator that I may not get there at all because the engine's going to stop working. I'll be stuck on the side of the highway. And so I always look for the effectiveness and the risk indicators and how do they relate and what does it mean? Because you can oftentimes focus on one and affect the other, but they tell you two different areas. So high level, I look at effectiveness and risk, not solely independent of each other, but they're dependent enough where I want to see both, but understand how one affects the other. And that can help you gauge your program. And you may, depending on your program, be at a state where you need to focus on the risk first and just just basically be ineffective for a while. By ineffective, I mean spending more money than you should or more people because the risk is so bad. But once you get the risk where you are, where you want it, then you can focus on the effectiveness and hone down the time resources to do what you do while still maintaining the right risk tolerance.
That's really good. So how would you apply that to a business today in either cyber or AI or something like that that's trying to focus on getting better at this?
It's a great question, and there's many examples, and we could debate either one of these for an hour. So I'm going to use a notional example, and I know there's many intricacies here, and we could debate them all day long. Let's take an organization, a theoretical organization that doesn't have a SOC. Okay, big risk. We don't see what's happening. So from a risk point of view, I need to get a SOC in place, and maybe I hire 100 people to look at every alert to start out, just to get a position of stability and risk managed. But once we do that, then the effectiveness can come in, which is we tune things, we introduce automation, some AI, and we can still get all of our alerts handled, but now maybe I need half the people. And if you try to do both at the same time, it might work. Sometimes it does, but usually you'll find a conflict where you leave the risk on the table longer than you want. And so that's part of your role as an exec is, do I do both at the same time? Do I do one at the expense of the other? And then here's the key. Tell your boss what you're doing and why.
Yeah, I mean, that's very important, right? So that you're setting expectations from them. I love how you preface that answer by saying they're all, we could debate all these things. There's all these basically nuances we could go down. Unfortunately, in today's world, we kind of have to do that, or we just have to ignore a lot of folks out there, because I love the saying, the man in the poem, whatever it is, about the man in the arena, right? The person who's in the arena doing things, you're always going to get criticized by the people on the outside, right? There's always that, yeah, but you didn't think about this, or this could have happened. Like, we hear this all the time. What are your thoughts on those kind of outlier cases? Because people like that are always wanting to point to some outlier, I mean, God, I used to hear this years ago. Do you want a smart TV because the Russians may be hacking you through your TV? And I would just be like, if the Russians are coming into your TV, you got bigger problems than what we're talking about here.
Right. It's a fringe case or an edge case. Right. And I don't want to discount the interesting nature and the potential risk of an edge case.
It's fun to talk about.
It is. But what I see is a thing that happens, and I'm at a loss of words for what do I call this thing right now, but I've got to go back for a step and talk about something we learned in the Air Force, which was the OODA loop, OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. Observe and orient. You think about the issue, decide is what we're going to do about it, act as you implement it. And here's what I see all the time, and this is a word of professional advice no matter what career you're in, is those who really succeed in their careers are those who can do all four. But the most critical part is make the decision and then act. And so what I see with risk scenarios is you identify the major risk, and some people will want to stay in the observe and orient, or always analyzing. And that's where these edge cases come up, and they never go into decide and act. And it's decide and act that makes the risk reduction. And so the thing that frustrates me with edge cases is it's almost always somebody who can never actually implement the risk reduction, because it's riskier to go into decide and act. It's safer to observe and orient. And a really nice example of this too is, if you don't want to read Air Force history, Eric O'Neill just had a great book I just finished this week, and it was called The Gray Man. And it was about how he caught Robert Hansen, one of the worst spies. And it talked about how Robert Hansen always manipulated his OODA loop to be tighter than the FBI's. And it wasn't until he figured that out that he was able to disrupt Robert Hansen's OODA loop to get him to make some mistakes. And then they got the evidence they needed and arrested him. So what I'm really trying to say is decide and act is ultimately what drives your impact. But if you decide and act too quickly, that could be bad too. And that's why this is hard. You got to know the right limit. So what I'm really trying to say, long answer to a short question, is if you're not careful, the edge cases and the fringe cases will keep you away from a decision and acting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's beautifully put. We can't base our risk management strategy on some theoretically possible edge case just because someone can come up and somebody will
maybe
do
we come
it
back
somewhere.
to it later.
Yeah,
Phase
exactly.
2.
When we get more mature in our risk management journey, then maybe we do get the luxury of focusing on these what ifs.
Are we better now than we were before?
Exactly.
Right.
But first, let's get our basic blocking and tackling down and move on that continuum of maturing. And really, Ian, this all kind of gets summed up in something you talked about becoming a strategic business partner. And in that, you told this story that I love the story of the plane, getting the plane. You tell the story and how that really just wraps up our whole discussion.
Well, so this story is one that happened in the early, maybe mid-90s, a long time ago. And it happened before I really had any information security background. I mentioned out of college, I had my pilot's license and I was at a fighter squadron. And once a month, the colonels let lieutenants come into their staff meeting of all the squadron commanders and the wing commander, very senior officer, has been flying fighter jets for 20, 30 years, very intimidating group. We got to sit on the back of the wall. And we're allowed to do that as long as we were not seen or not heard. We were just there to listen. I'm so happy this leadership did that. It was very transparent to them because we got to see how senior leaders made decisions. And I still remember this day, the equivalent of the CIO stood up one day and talking to the boss. The boss, was a very senior colonel, flew fighters, didn't know technology like a CIO did. And he said, "Hey boss, I need $1 million. I need, some routers for blinky lights and wires." And it was a very technical discussion. I had an engineering degree and I had no idea what this guy said, no idea at all. And he was very senior. He was a colonel as well. And I remember the boss looking at him and saying, "Denied, sit down." And it was really humiliating for the person. And I felt terrible for him. 30 years ago, I still kind of feel that.
Yeah.
But what I remember is the next month, here we are again. He stands up. "Boss, I need $1 million." The reason why is your fuel supply on base can keep jets flying for about 3 days. And I'm changing the numbers and the details here just to make sure it's not, real life.
Yeah.
But you're going to get the point. And he said, this fuel supply can be disrupted because it's open to anybody with a connection to the internet. And if that happens, and it is reasonably likely that it'll happen, you can fly your planes for 3 days and that's it. But for $1 million, I can buy the technology to secure that. Boss looked at him and said, "Approved." Same message, same outcome desired, but the delivery was different. And it was in the perspective of what mattered to the boss in this case. He didn't care about blinky lights and wires. He wanted his planes to be able to get off the ground and fly. And so if you can put your objective in the context of what the boss wants, it's a different way to be effective. And I remembered it from that day. I had been out of college maybe 6 months, and that has carried with me ever since.
I mean, it carried with me. That was one of those things I was writing down because it really does sum up everything we've been talking about. You understand the objectives, the mission, your mission, and you're focused on the mission. You communicate it in an effective manner, and you're doing it in a way that's not delving into the minutia and all that other stuff, and you got the right outcome.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Ian, any other thoughts that you have? Anything that's been on your mind that you may want to talk about?
We would need a lot longer than another 30 minutes, but just to leave that last story, here's the important part for leaders. Here we are talking about that very important event over 30 years later, and it's going to help somebody out there, I hope, listening.
Yeah.
And the reason I learned that is because the senior leaders took a risk and they opened up this very tight forum to outsiders, young lieutenants who 6 months out of college, no experience, to let them see and make mistakes and have the discussions. And in this case, one person of their peers got semi-humiliated, right? But by opening up your conversations and helping to develop the next generation of leaders is your job, and it's okay. It can be encouraged. So as leaders, you're a product of leaders before you, part of your job is to develop the leaders coming after you.
Man, amen to that. I don't have anything to add to that other than, well done. Great job.
Thank you. It was an honor
Ian,
to be here.
Yep. Hey, thank you so much for being
Enjoyed
here.
it.
And thank you all for listening. Unfortunately, we're at the end. I think Ian and I could talk about these things all day, but you probably don't want to listen to us talk about them all day. So that's okay. But thank you for tuning in and watching this episode. And we hope that you'll go to our page and click it, like it, share it with other people who may be interested as well. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks. Bye-bye.